And hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be, well, I'm happy and also sort of not happy to be talking about this topic because it's just unhappy because of the circumstances that we're all finding ourselves in. And that just emphasizes how important these skills are. So this is gonna be a presentation. I'm gonna go through a lot of material today, really fast. I want to introduce you to a lot of concepts. I want to give you some tools that you can use in making decisions. And when we get to the end of that, we're going to open it up for questions and try to start a dialogue around some of these. I'd love to hear about some of the challenges that folks are facing and to reflect on what we have learned in this session together that you might be able to use to help you make decisions. A little bit about the Construction Institute, and then a little bit about me. The Construction Institute is a professional membership organization. Its members represent everyone in the industry. So it's owners, architects, engineers, contractors, subcontractors, accountants, attorneys, estimators, folks who supply commercial furniture. Every aspect of the industry is represented. And that's because our mission is to promote cross-industry collaboration, which if you're in this industry, you know how badly we need that to make things work. We spend a lot of time talking and teaching how to communicate better, how we need to work together, how we can work together better to make all of our lives easier. And communication is so important at this moment when none of us knows quite what's going on or what's going to happen. We are, as an organization, in the process of becoming an independent 501c3 for the first time in our 44-year history. And of course, we're doing it at the worst possible time with all of the things that are going on. But we do have a major fundraising campaign going on. And I would love to encourage any of you and all of you to visit constructioninstitute.org. And to look at membership if you're not already a member. I know there are a bunch of you who are members, and I know there are some folks on the call, on the listening, who are not members. So consider joining us. It's a great group of people. Our mission is really to think through how to make things better in the industry. So now a short word about me. I've been in the industry one way or another for the last 38 years. I'm an attorney, and I started in the industry representing energy clients who were cities and towns and rural electric cooperatives who happened to be part owners of nuclear power plants, which is where I got my introduction to construction. First job site I ever toured was a nuclear power plant, I was 24. It was really interesting. And then life has many strange twists and turns, and I met, incorporated, and subsequently married a fellow who had dropped out of college to work with his hands. He was a builder, but when I met him, he was getting his degree in architecture, and he became a licensed architect. And we owned a design build firm in the Washington, D.C. area for 30 years, which we grew to about 50 employees and multi-million-dollar business. And it was so I've seen construction from every possible angle. And in the last decade, I've worked as an arbitrator and a mediator doing conflict resolution in the industry. And that is where I have really learned and continue to study the neuroscience of decision making. When you're working as a mediator, your job is to help people figure out how to solve a problem that they've come across during the course of the project. And these issues come in lots of different forms. And instead of a litigation mentality, a conflict mentality, a fight mentality, mediation is about creating a roadmap to a solution. And it's really been important for me to learn how people make decisions to be effective in that role. And I think this neuroscience of decision making, the neuroscience of leadership, we have so much to learn from this. And so let's get started. So the first thing we need to recognize is at the moment, nothing is normal. Our normal patterns are completely disrupted. We can't do anything the way that we're used to doing it. Everything's suspended. We spend our time differently. What we eat is different because we shop differently. How we interact with our loved ones is different unless they're in the home with us, and then maybe there's sort of too much interaction going on at the moment. And how we work and whether we're working is all disrupted, and it's not going to be normal. Like, will it? When we say normal, it's what we were used to, right? That's what normal means in this case, what we were used to. Will we ever get back to that? Maybe not. Is there going to be a second wave that we're going to have to cope with? Yes. And what are the longer term implications for dealing with this kind of pandemic? What does it mean for design? What is it going to continue to mean for disruptions in the supply chain? There are a lot of unknowns out there. And when things are unknown, we get stressed, right? We start thinking, what are we going to do? What can we do? Pardon the paper interruption.
Yeah, no.
There's tremendous uncertainty. We're actually worrying about everything. We're worrying about our family. We're worrying about our country. We're worrying about the world. We're worrying about our jobs. We're worrying about our communities, our neighbors, and we're cut off from our normal coping mechanisms. We're cut off from normal human interactions. We're cut off from family. We're cut off from religious institutions. We're cut off from gyms. We can go out. There's no swimming pools that are open. We can go out and walk. Those of us who run, but there's not. Our activities are really very limited, and at the same time, we think we're supposed to be able to be highly productive in this context. And I read a really great blog from a woman in the Yale Daily News. Her name is Elizabeth Hopkinson. I'm going to read to you what she wrote, because I think a lot of us are experiencing this. She wrote, "I feel worn out, both from the diffuse panic I feel for our world and the more acute sense of grief I'm experiencing for my own personal disappointments. These past weeks, I've been channeling my anxiety into the gallon of ice cream in my freezer. Though it's hard to get ice cream, I found. But steeping between these feelings of worry and distress is this pervasive sense of guilt that I'm wasting my time, that I'm being lazy and therefore worthless. Ironically, this guilt over my lack of productivity only makes it harder for me to have the energy to actually get things done." Well, sometimes doing what we do, it's hard to know, it's hard to measure our productivity under these circumstances, and that creates another kind of stress. And yet, we have to make decisions. And this is what our decisions look like. This slide, it depicts, like, there are all these paths out there, there are all these possibilities, and we really can't see what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen, and yet we have to choose a path. We have to move forward and make decisions. So my goal today is to give you a better understanding of decision making and to equip you with some tools that can help you make good decisions. So we are going to talk about, I've just talked about the stress we're experiencing. We're going to talk about the effect of stress on decision making, tools for managing stress, and that's going to lead us into a discussion of how we make decisions and the cognitive biases or cognitive distortions that can interfere with our decision making. And then more tools. And a word about tools. Nothing will happen if you don't pick them up, right? So it's like going to the gym. When we talk about making changes, neuroplasticity, we can make changes in our brain. A lot of you are familiar with the idea that mindfulness, which we'll touch on, can help change the pathways that you can change your habits, you can change your thinking. But you need to practice. You are literally building muscle memory pathway. You're literally building new pathways in your brain when you do this stuff. So let's first look at what happens to our brains on stress.
Nancy, can
Yes,
I interrupt real quick?
Yeah, please.
We have a question from an attendee saying, how do we measure productivity?
Well, it really depends on what it is you're trying to accomplish. So the first way you measure productivity is you set goals, and goal setting is part of decision making, right? What are the goals that you want to accomplish? And then what are the steps you need? It's really making a map. you make a map. What are the steps you need to accomplish that goal? And then what's your time frame? And then you measure what you can accomplish and what you can do really on a daily basis. But there are so many possible things we could do. So that's one of the reasons why you have to have a focused approach to decision making, and so that you can keep yourself on track, and you can have that measurement. Sometimes there are so many different things that come at you during a day. If you have one goal in mind, but you've had to deal with all these things that took you off base, you may feel like you haven't achieved productivity for that day. So one of my favorite tricks is to say, okay, this was what my goal was. I didn't get there, but I'm going to sit down and list all the things I did accomplish today. And then you start to see, wow, I really did a lot, and some days you just get stuck, and then you just like go for a walk, take a minute, read a book, take a break, take a mental break, and then come back to it. What I wanted to talk about with this slide is what happens to our brains on stress. So you can see optimal functioning, and I see a typo in the picture that I copied, so I apologize for that. And then you see the brain that's stressed and depressed. This comes from the Mayo Foundation, and what's lit up, and I hope you can see my mouse, because what I'm circling now is the prefrontal cortex, right? That's the decision-making part of our brain. And the decision-making part of our brain and parts of our brain that express, that are emotional, express happy emotions, they're all off. Like there's very little going on here in this stressed and depressed brain. So what happens is we become distracted and lose our ability to concentrate. Our memory is adversely affected. Our thinking becomes disorganized, and habitual responses take over. And so this is a chemical reaction, right? A family of neuromodulators called catecholamines, as dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine, are released in our peripheral and central nervous systems during stress, and they turn on our heart and other muscles and turn off the stomach to prepare for flight, literally fight or flight responses. The brain will turn on the amygdala and turn off the prefrontal cortex. So we're literally thinking with our lizard brain. The other thing that happens when we're stressed and we feel a threat is that our brain goes into, it's like we put blinders on, our brain goes into intense single focus. Well, you can see if you're about to enter into a battle, or there's a lion out there, why that makes sense. But it doesn't make sense for some of the more complex decision making we have. And in terms of our emotional and chemical response to these things, our brain doesn't really distinguish between a lion and a salary negotiation. So this is what is happening to our biology. Now, stress, a constant state of stress, and the woman we just read about talked about her diffuse sense of stress, or diffuse sense of panic. We're going through this state, and we're going through it for a fairly long period of time, and we don't necessarily see the end to it. And that puts us in the kind of state of alertness that combat soldiers have. And I think it's very interesting to note that autism mothers who have to deal with, who are trying to do their best for kids who are having difficulties that are not necessarily predictable. They're triggers. You don't know whether those triggers are going to happen, but you're in a constant state of alertness. And that changes the brain over time. In fact, there's a really interesting article about, that you see physical changes in the brain if you're under a state of constant stress. But again, that's the bad news part of it. But the good news part of it is that using some of the tools that we'll talk about and taking advantage of the fact that our brains, we are like muscles. If you have a weak muscle, you can rebuild it. You can change the pathways. Okay, and stress, as we know, is transferable. We have our own stress, our spouse's stress, our coworker stress. We might be dealing with our kids' stress, parents' stress. There's just, how you feel emotionally when you listen to someone who's in a state of stress. It raises your own level. And there's I mean, just before we started this, because I am constantly learning about this, there's a whole magazine, the Harvard Business Review, had a special issue. This actually is from 2019, about a year ago, April 22nd, 2019. The Brain Science Behind Business. Great series of articles. And one of the things they talk about is cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And they describe it as it's like a sustained release tablet. When it kicks up in your system for whatever reason, you know, from negative feedback or just from stress, and the more you ruminate about it, the longer the impact of that cortisol. So it doesn't leave your system quickly. Whereas oxytocin, which is the positive chemical that we get from being happy, from having something really work well, from being excited, is not, unfortunately, not a long-lasting hormone. And so the folks who wrote this article, Judith and Richard Glaser, talk about the chemistry of conversation and how to create positive conversations. Really interesting stuff. All right, now more bad news. Stress affects your decision making. Stressed out negotiators are less effective than their calmer counterparts. Researchers at Cornell and California State matched pairs of undergraduates to negotiate a hypothetical class trip. And the more stress the students experienced before negotiating, the less value they claimed in the task. And it wasn't, so when they felt they lacked negotiating skills and the resources they needed to perform well, they viewed this session as a threat and they experienced stress. They were more passive. They approached the exercise as dividing up the pie rather than exploring creative trade-off ideas. And they were more likely to resort to demands instead of taking a problem-solving approach. Whereas the students who believed they were prepared to meet the task viewed it as a challenge. They kept their stress levels in check. They were less fearful. They were more confident and optimistic. By and large, they reached better, more creative solutions, and they were more satisfied with the results. Now, that's an interesting point, and we'll come back to that as well. When you feel prepared, when you are ready to explore something and ready, when you've made a decision, once you've gone through it and figured out what you want to do, you will be more satisfied with results, even if things don't work out the way that you ideally wanted them to. Oops. Okay, stress also affects your performance under pressure. There's a great study of the effect of stress on surgical performance. And they found that while it had both positive and negative effects, undue levels of stress impaired judgment, decision-making, and communication, which is absolutely critical in a surgical procedure. And though junior surgeons showed uncertainty about their ability to cope, the senior surgeons had developed sophisticated strategies for controlling it over time. And what the takeaway was from this study is that they began to teach junior surgeons the coping skills that the senior surgeons had learned. They identified what they were, and they taught the junior surgeons, and that improved their job. And that's exactly the kind of thing that we're doing today. You can learn these strategies, and they will improve your ability to make good decisions. So before we start on that road, we need to figure out, okay, what is a good decision? For that, we turn to some of our professors of management, business professors. And these are two interesting definitions. And they come from an article that I read, which is cited here. And you'll see lots of citations, and there's a whole list of citations with hyperlinks at the end of this presentation, so you can take a deep dive into some of the concepts that intrigue you and that you want to learn more about. But design engineering is the name of the article. And I'm like, okay, there are some engineers I know in the audience, and I think that it's really interesting to think about it that way. Or if you're a project manager, when you're making choices all the time, you're mapping things out, and there's a project management approach to making decisions. It's applying some of the same ideas and principles. So what's a good decision? Well, a good decision is one that's logically consistent with what we can do, what we want, and what we know. I think that's a really great definition. And the second definition here is a good decision is an informed choice that's based on valid information and internal commitment. And my pulling together of these two is to say a good decision is consistent with what we know, consistent with what we want, consistent with what we can do, and to which we can really give our internal commitment. There are other ways I want you to think about decisions and what's a good decision. We all know a good outcome is not the same as a good decision. You can make a really good decision and circumstances can change, and things for one reason or another may not work out the way you think they were going to. That doesn't mean you didn't make a good decision. You can make the best decision that you can, but part of decision making is knowing what happens next, right? So if you think of a decision and there are forks in the road, and suddenly the fork that you don't want comes up, you've already thought through what you're going to do if that happens. So decision making is like making a roadmap of where you want to go and what all the possibilities are. So we can increase the probability of good outcomes by improving our decision making, including looking at all the possibilities, including making sure we have all the facts. There are always multiple paths to a desired outcome. There's always a range of possibilities. We always need to be thinking about what all of those possibilities are, and in order to make a decision about how we are going to proceed. I love this thought. Decision is an allocation of resources. When you make a decision, you're allocating your time, your energy, you may be allocating money, you may be allocating the time of other people, depending on what kind of a decision you're making. And so if you think about it as a process of resource allocation, is this really the best allocation of the resources that you have available? And that's another angle to think about your decision from that will help you. Decision has a time frame. We need to consider when we need to make a decision. We need to think about the long-term consequences as well as the short-term consequences. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, a decision creates a pathway, and what does our roadmap look like? So what's our goal? Our goal today is to learn how to have greater clarity about decision making, how to be better prepared to engage with whatever happens, to be more confident in your decisions and actions. And when you do all of that, when you're prepared, when you've really thought through your decision, you'll be more satisfied with the results. Okay, so what are our tools for better decision making? Understanding how to make decisions, how we make decisions. That's what we'll be doing all day. I mean, all hour. Learning to deal with stress, because remember how we've just gone through all the negative effects of stress on decision making. We're going to talk about checking your cognitive biases, taking time to prepare, and practicing. Tools for managing stress that we're going to talk about include mindfulness, communication, mind, body, mind feedback, and rethinking stress. So, okay, just making sure I have notes for something that's coming up. What is mindfulness? Mindfulness is the state or quality of being mindful or aware of something. And it's as simple as that. It's about being aware without judgment. It's not about being calm, although it can be calming, and it doesn't require long periods of reflection. It requires that you think about what's happening in the present moment, how you're feeling about it, how you're reacting to it. Now, I'm going to give you an example of how quickly you can change your mindset. I'm going to do it by talking about a game that they have at the Hartford Science Center that's called Mind Ball. Now, this is a game I played, I want to say it was 3 years ago at the Professional Women in Construction 10th year anniversary, which was held there, which was a lovely event. And so Mind Ball is a game where you hook the sensors up to your head, and there's a fairly frictionless surface there, and you have an opponent on the other side of this. And the goal of the game is to get the ball to go over to their side. And in this game of Mind Ball, the calmest person wins. So I tried this game with a woman that I had just met, and I really didn't even know what she did, and she didn't know what I did. But we sat down and we played this game, And I put on my best mediator persona, my most relaxed, detached, in the moment persona. And the ball went flying over to her side. Well, we talked a little further, and she decided it wasn't fair at all because I have that mediator persona, and she happened to be a litigator. So I said, fine, like, we're going to play this again. And this time you're going to think about something that you find calming, relaxing, something that you love. What is that for you? And she said, opera. I said, great. You're just going to have some opera that you love going in your head. And I'm going to start thinking about all the things I didn't get done today, all of the things that are waiting for me to do at home when I get home, and all of the things that are now going to be crowding onto my list, my to-do list for tomorrow. And we'll do it again. And we did it a second time, and the ball came flying over to my side. So you can change your mindset positively or negatively in an extremely short period of time. And when you take the time to do that, to observe where you are and change it to the positive, is very powerful in terms of helping you detach from what's going on. It's that moment of mindfulness that you need to say, oh, I'm feeling really stressed. Let's, stop for a minute and try to take that stress out of the equation of this decision I'm trying to make. Talk it out. We all know that if we're feeling stressed, talking to somebody helps. We've all had this experience. Well, the study that they did that I really love is they did a study of young women, first-year college students, and they measured their cortisol, and they had high stress, and then they had them call their moms, and the oxytocin increased, and they felt much better. But what they never did was the second half of the study, and I can tell you this because I've had young women who were away at college, and when they get off the phone, they feel better, but you as the mom or the parent are just vibrating at like this stress level that doesn't go down. Remember, cortisol doesn't go down as quickly. And also, if you don't know what the result is, like 5 minutes later, they're out running around with their friends and they're feeling much better. If you don't see that, you don't have any basis for letting those chemicals calm down. Okay, your body language shapes who you are. So we're going to talk now about something called postural feedback. So just as your brain can make your when you're feeling stressed, your brain goes into that fight or flight mode and your body tenses up. You can untense your body, and that feedback will help your brain calm. So Amy Cuddy, I encourage you to watch this TED Talk. This is the TED Talk she did in 2012. After she did this, there were a bunch of people who kind of attacked her study. But then in 2018, it was rehabilitated, and there's the aspects of it. She did some measuring of hormones, and that part of it maybe not so much. But the part of it that remains valuable is that she had students go into power poses, and many of you may have heard of this, right? She had the power stances include standing with your hands on your hips. All of the power poses are very open. All of the low power poses are kind of arms crossed, crunched in. And she had students take these positions for 2 minutes before they went into some stressful, situation they might otherwise have thought of as a stressful conversation or a negotiation. And those who did the high power poses for 2 minutes had greater confidence and better results from the process. So it doesn't take a lot, just like mindfulness, stopping for a minute and sort of recentering your brain. You can use these postural feedback methods to help calm your body down so you get rid of some of that stress. And again, you can perform better, you can think better when you do that. Another way of doing it is yoga, thanks to Anna Greenwald, my daughter of onthegoga.com, for giving me her take on a yoga pose that you can do when you're feeling stressed that can help you calm. And I asked her for one that you could do in a bathroom stall in under 5 minutes, so that this is something that when I teach conflict resolution and negotiation, if you're feeling stressed, this is something you can go you know, and hide for just a couple of minutes and use to recenter your physical energy. And when I teach this class in person, we actually do this yoga pose. I have everyone stand up and do it. I will not make you do that today because I can't monitor you, but it's a great exercise. It's simple and it's easy to do, and in a short period of time helps you recenter. I'm really interested in learning more about some of the sensory processing methods that are now being used to help people who suffer from anxiety. One of these is called havening. It's a technique for interrupting and rewiring negative thinking. And it's based on the observation that if people use certain physical methods of just touching themselves, one is the arms, one is, I don't know the face technique, but one is just rubbing your hands together. And if you are thinking about something and you're doing this at the same time, it has a very centering effect. And it's so that's a third way we've talked about that feedback to calm the body and thereby calm the brain. Okay, last on stress. It's time to learn to think differently about stress. Please take the time to watch Kelly McGonigal's TED Talk on YouTube. It is so interesting. So her goal is to change your mind about how you think about stress. And she talks about a study. There were 30,000 adults, and they monitored them over an 8-year period. And they asked them 2 questions. The first is, how much stress have you experienced in the last year? And the second was, do you believe that stress is harmful for your health? And then they followed the public death records to see who died. Okay. So the bad news is people who experienced a lot of stress in the previous year had a 43% increased risk of dying. But that was only true for the people who also believed that stress was harmful for their health. The people who had a lot of stress, but who did not believe that stress was harmful to their health, had the lowest risk of dying. And that's fascinating. So we all know that how we think about things affects how we react to them. The placebo effect comes to mind when we talk about changing our approach to things, right? If you think you're taking a medicine, placebo effect is they do in drug studies all the time. Half the people get the medicine, half the people get something other than the medicine, and nobody knows whether they're taking the medicine or not. And some people get better who are not taking the medicine that's being tested because they think they're being given medicine that's helping them. So the way we think about stress, if we think that stress is going to hurt us, it's going to hurt us. And if we think about stress as a normal part of life and something we can step back from and something we have to deal with, that can help us make better decisions that can help our health as well. So please watch Kelly McGonigal. All right. Now, making good decisions requires letting go of preconceptions. I love this quote from Einstein. We can't solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. Well, in today's environment, it's perhaps better that we should say we can't solve our current problems with the same thinking we used, 4 months ago, 3 months ago, 2 months ago. We need new thinking to approach figuring out how to make decisions in this environment and what decisions to make. So let's talk about catastrophizing. Catastrophizing, striking out before we get to the plate, right? If we're catastrophizing, we can't make good decisions. Buddha talks about catastrophizing negative thinking as the second arrow. The first arrow is the arrow that hits us, right? Whatever that arrow is, whatever crisis it is, whatever problem it is. The second arrow is the one that we create for ourselves through our reaction to it. If we spend a lot of time just mulling over the negativity, and remember that part I said a few minutes ago, where that cortisol that you create through all that negative thinking sticks with you. It doesn't go out of your system quickly. It's a time-released capsule that's going to stay with you and keep hurting you and keep hurting your decision making. So catastrophizing, that second arrow, that negative thinking, is a form of cognitive distortion or cognitive bias. So now we're going to drill down into well, what's a cognitive bias? A cognitive bias is just a way of thinking that affects the decisions and judgments that people make, and it's best learned by example. So, sorry, I'm moving these pictures around on the screen so I can see my slide. Confirmation bias is one of the first ones I learned about, and that is where you look at all of the information that's out there, and you just hone in on the ones that support what you've already decided. That's a terrible way to make a decision, because what you really want to do is open yourself up to what is all the information that's out there. But when cognitive bias interferes with us, so we don't seek out objective facts. We interpret information to support our existing beliefs. We only remember the details that support our belief. That's an interesting piece of it. And we ignore information that comes across that challenges our beliefs. That's what we call confirmation bias. Availability bias is another one that we are all subject to. So there's the universe of all the information. There's the information we know about, and that information can distort. If that's what we know about and we haven't looked at what other information is out there, that will distort our decision making. And also the information that you saw yesterday or 5 minutes ago is going to stick in your mind and affect your decision making. And we'll talk about how to deal with some of these cognitive biases when we talk about preparing for decision making. There's a great article cited here, How Clients Think, the brains behind decision making, that talks about these and some other cognitive biases. Overconfidence bias. All of us have this. We all think our judgment is better than most other people's. And I hate to pick on the guys here, but this is the classic study. The AAA released a study in 2018 showing that 8 out of 10 men think they're above average drivers, right? So we know that can't be true. So that's something to be careful about. Always question, always ask for other opinions so that you can vet your own judgment rather than relying on it. The fallacy of sunk costs is an economic concept and a really important one in this context. But sunk costs are costs, it's when what is done can't be undone, right? So you've spent $100 on something, you've spent 100 hours on something, you've spent, $50,000 on something, and there are reasons why circumstances have changed and you can't recapture that money, that time, that energy that you've spent on something. It is a reminder that we have to think not about where we've been and what we've expended, but where are we right now and what is the best decision we can make from this point forward. And giving up some of those sunk costs may be part of it, but don't let yourself be weighed down by them, and don't let your decisions be distorted by, I see this all the time in mediation. When people get to there, they've expended time, money, they've been frustrated, and if that's what they focus on, they're not going to be able to answer the question, here's where I am, here's what I have to look forward to if I don't solve this problem today. In mediation context, you have to look forward to as litigation or arbitration. It's a lot of time taken away from productive activity, and what is the best solution you can reach today? So that's an important one to be aware of. Okay, the priming effect, very interesting. This is one that you can use to your advantage as well, but it has to do with the fact that our brains focus or are triggered to thinking about whatever it is we just have been heard. So if it's something positive, then we could be in a positive mindset. If it's something negative, we'll be in a negative mindset, which is, please don't make decisions when you're at a low point. Like if you're feeling really down on a certain day and you really just can't see your way out of something, start mapping possibilities, list all the possibilities, even the ones you think you can't accomplish, but don't make any decisions. It's like when you come out of minor surgery or, and they say, you've been under anesthesia, don't make decisions for the next, don't sign a contract for 24 hours. Don't make decisions when you're feeling really down. So if you've recently seen or heard the word EAT, you are temporarily more likely to complete the word fragment S-O blank P as soup rather than soap. And the opposite is true if you've recently seen the word wash. There are, lots of studies they do on this. One study that's of particular interest to me in terms of mediation and decision making is one that was done with three groups of people. They were each given the same issue to mediate, same facts, circumstances to mediate. One group had a mediator who gave used negative words: conflict, problem, dispute, argument. And then one group had a mediator who made no opening statement. And the third group had a mediator who used problem-solving phrases like solution, roadmap, conclusion is even a positive word, because that's what you want to be done with, your problem, and move on to the next thing. You want to be done with the situation. And what was interesting was not, as you expect, the people who had the negative talk before they went in had fewer resolutions. And the ones who had the positive talk had more, and then the people with no talk were kind of in the middle. But what was striking was the degree of difference. It was like 25% success rate for those who had the negative talk, and almost a 75% success rate for those who had the positive talk. So it makes a huge difference when you use positive words in a conflict resolution situation. It makes huge difference if you use positive words talking to yourself in terms of how you're going to problem solve something. Anchoring bias is another one. Everyone should be aware of this when they go into their next salary negotiation. Whatever the first, and there's study after study after study that shows this is true. If you're talking about numbers, whatever the first number is that's said, so if it's salary and you say a high number, the result will tend to gravitate towards the higher number, whereas if the other side starts with a lower number, it'll tend to gravitate towards that number. And I think this applies to ideas as well. Whatever the first idea is that comes out there may anchor a conversation, and you want to be careful about that, because you may be in a situation where you're talking through possible decisions with others, and you want to make sure that you're vetting all of the possibilities. And that you don't get stuck with that anchor just because it is first. All right, and then there's framing bias, right? And framing bias is how you look at something. Is the glass half full? Is it half empty? And here we have the frozen yogurt contains 20% fat or 80% fat-free, right? We're all going to take the one on the right and not the one on the left. They're the same. So reframing something can lead to different results, but how something is framed can affect how you think about it and your decision making. So again, it's something we need to be careful of. All right, this slide shows you there are a gazillion different kinds of cognitive bias, and I'm not going to go through all of them now, obviously, but this slide is there. I know that Anastasia is planning to put it up on YouTube, and you'll have access to it. All right, sorry, just checking the time, guys. So now I'm going to talk faster. Last thing you need to be aware of is assessing risks and rewards. All right, and I'll run through this very quickly. It's something called prospect theory. So when people are given a choice between a sure gain of $250 and a 25% chance to gain 1,000 and a 75% chance to gain nothing, they choose A. They choose the sure thing. When they're presented with a loss situation, C and D, C is a sure loss of $750, or D, a 75% chance to lose $1,000 and a 25% chance to lose nothing, they are going to choose D. They're much more willing to risk in a loss situation. And that might be a good thing, but we need to be aware that we have that tendency, so we can, again, check yourself before you move forward with something. All right, top 3 tools for good decision making. You ready, guys? Some of you have taken my negotiation class, and the answer is the same. Top 3 tools are prepare, prepare, and prepare. So first thing you have to know is, what's the question? And make sure you're looking at the big picture. There's a great article cited here. Are you leading through the crisis or managing the response? Interesting. So what is it you're reacting to? What is the question? you know, and the classic story of the blind men with the elephant, right? They don't see that it's an elephant. They all think it's something different because they're all taking a different piece of it. So spend time figuring out what's the question. Einstein said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem, analyzing the problem. What's going on here? What do I need to be thinking about? And 5 minutes thinking about solutions. So here's the first piece of your toolkit. Make a self-assessment. What do you want? What do you need? What are your concerns? What are you afraid of? Assess the circumstances. What are the facts? What additional information do you want? What are the constraints? Ask yourself, are they really constraints, or are you imposing constraints because you're making assumptions about something? If you need information from other people, don't assume you know the answer. Ask the answer. It may surprise you. What are the unknowns? What are the risks? What are the potential rewards? What's your timeline? Here's where you're making your roadmap. Identify all possible outcomes. What are your hopes? What do you think are reasonable expectations? What do you see as the most likely scenario? What's the worst case scenario? Write it down, identify it, and make your plan. And your plan includes what resources can you bring to bear to achieve your best outcome? What help can you look for? What is your plan for communicating your decision to others, or for vetting it with others before you make it? What will you do if you succeed? What will you do if you don't succeed? Remember, no decision is made in a vacuum. Everything's a roadmap. Here you map out the possibilities. And this is a chart I put together. It's really simple. It covers some of these things. If you're make it, you know, write it down, make your own chart, make your own, you know, create your own ideas for how you're going to do it, but write out your plan. And when you're done writing out your plan, what are you going to do? You're going to go through your plan a second time, and you're going to ask yourself if if any of those cognitive biases have snuck their way into your decision-making process. And, you know, use the support that's available to you. Talk it through with others, and that's going to be your best chance. So you make the plan, then you go back. It's like making your list, checking it twice, and then go back and ask yourself the question: is this a good decision? Is it consistent with what we want, what we know, what we can do, and is it something to which we can give our internal commitment? It's important to face our fears, because things may go south, especially in these circumstances. But failure is never the end of the story. I love Michael Jordan. I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost more than 300 games, he said. 26 times I've been trusted to make the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again, and that's why I succeed, because that's never the end of the story. There's always another game. There's always the next step. There's always the next thing you can do. In negotiation, we have a concept called BATNA. It's best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And that really is a short way of saying, what are you going to do if it doesn't work out? What are you going to do if things don't work out the way you want them to? If you know the answer to that question, if you're not just afraid of it, then you will make better decisions. You'll be better able to adjust to whatever circumstances happen. So some decision-making superpowers really quickly. Listening to other people is amazing superpower. Focus on the problem, not on the people, not on the person. If you're trying to deal with a conflict situation, being a team with the other person to identify what the problem is and talk with them about ways you can work together to solve it is a superpower. Clarity is so important. Being creative and identifying solutions, staying open and flexible, having that mindful moment so you can take a mental step back. Learn the power of questions. Don't assume you know what people think. Don't assume you know what's going on. Like, do your due diligence. Find out as much as you can. Learn to reframe things rather than reject, and stay calm. Really use all of these tools to help you make calm decisions. What's your superpower? I put this in because you all have something that you're really good at in terms of how you make decisions. think about what is that for you and use that superpower to help you make decisions and develop some more. Okay, like everything else in the world, there's an app for that. Whoop is an app that creates small steps that you can use to practice things and practice your goals and get to your goals. The app guides you through 4 steps, which is what Whoop stands for: wish, outcome, obstacle, and plan. Got that? Plan. So here's your phone. Keep it. You can do small things, bigger things. Play with it. It's useful. And keep learning. Okay, these are 2 of my favorite books. Getting to Yes with Yourself has been one of my favorite books for a long time. Bill Urey and Roger Fisher wrote the seminal book on negotiating, which is called Getting to Yes. And this Getting to Yes with Yourself is about how you think, how you make good decisions. It's a whole book about how you talk to yourself, how you think about things, how you analyze things, and making good decisions. I highly recommend it. And then one that my daughter Anna turned me on to, which I absolutely love, and I'm not going to read the title for obvious reasons. We'll unasterisk yourself. Please listen to it on audio. The Gary John Bishop is Scottish, and it's just a hoot to listen to him. He's very direct. His second book is called Cut That S Out, and it's just really practical, down-to-earth ways of getting rid of negative thinking, getting rid of self-doubt, so you can make good decisions and move forward. So here are 2 long lists of everything that I've cited, which you'll have access to. And that's more about me, which who cares? So let's go to questions.
I was hoping it looks like we don't have anything in the Q&A icon or in the chats. We can unmute everyone if there's any questions. One of the things that I actually, I was writing about, it's interesting when you were talking about stress, because I think that a lot of times I don't know when I'm stressed. I don't know, I think it's important, like, there's always a red flag, right? But I don't know if I know mine. I mean, obviously you can feel it, but when you're under pressure, you just kind of want to make decisions, or if you're under a deadline, and sometimes you don't stop and recognize, oh, that's, I have to like walk away or go, shut my computer or do something to just de-stress yourself, or go and stand in the stall for 5 minutes. So I think that's really interesting to even recognize when you have stress, because sometimes a lot of us, I think, probably make we're so used to having to make decisions quickly, or get something done, that we just kind of do it, and we actually work almost better under stress, which probably isn't super healthy, right?
No, I mean, we all know that sometimes if you're working under a deadline, you remember when you're feeling that threat, you can become more focused.
Yeah.
So sometimes it can help. Sometimes it helps get things done. I'm not sure it helps us always make the best decisions. It might help us make a good, what turns out to be a good decision quickly, or if we've already made up our minds and we're functioning under stress to get it done, that's different. But one of the things that I've learned to do, and it just really seems lame, but I do it. I have an alarm set for 11 a.m., 1 p.m., and 3 p.m. And those are my self-check-in times. So I stop and I just, how am I feeling? What kind of stress am I carrying? And there are also moments when I ask myself, there are also productivity check-ins. Like, what was it I planned to accomplish today? Where am I? Have I been squirreled off to something else? And how can I get back to what I wanted to accomplish today? Or should I get back? Do I really need to, take this on? But it's a moment of self-reflection, just not just about how I'm relating to what's going on, but how I'm doing with what I think I need to be doing in that day. And that's a pretty simple tool, and it works.
Yeah, that's great. That's super easy. Plus you get to take a break. I love breaks. Well, everyone, we have about 5 minutes. It doesn't look like there's any more questions or comments. So thank you so much, Nancy. Before we go, I want to play a really quick game that we call Odd Man Out. So I'm going to say 3 sentences that have to do with leadership, and it's up to you to decide which sentence is the odd man out. Are you ready? And if you, whether you win or not, you get the full digital album of the new Fiona Apple Fetch the Bolt Cutters. I promise you'll get that regardless. Okay, which one is the odd man out? Great leaders make sure they are heard and understood. Great leaders are usually white men over the age of 50 with 1-syllable names like Bob, Frank, or John. Or the best leaders out there know when they need help and they know where to turn in order to get it.
Oh, we're going to have to go with B, obviously. but I know those guys. They are out there.
They're great leaders. All right. Congrats. That's correct. The odd man out is that great leaders are usually white men over the age of 50. That would include my father, and he's a great leader, but his name's it's 2 syllables, Michael. Okay, so I'm going to send you the Fetch the Bolt Cutters album. We are going to I'm going to go ahead and put your email. Actually, I'm going to have Sarah go ahead and put Nancy's email. If anybody wants to contact Nancy after this, write in the chat box so you can contact her. And we are going to put this recording on YouTube so everyone will have access to it that didn't have the opportunity to join in. And I also want to say special thanks to today's sponsor, Deco Inc. And you can check them out at DECCO.com. Thank you so much, Nancy. That was
Thank
super
you.
helpful.
I enjoyed it very much. And thanks to all of you who are listening.